Hi, my name is Ruth Clare and I am the author of a memoir called Enemy, which is about my experience growing up in a home with family violence. I'm also a speaker and an MC and a panel facilitator. The narrative in domestic violence often centres around the concept of a perpetrating father and a mother who is a victim of domestic violence from that perpetrator, but then she is also an adequate caregiver for her children and she plays a protective role for those children. My experience was quite different to that. My father was violent. My mother was very scared of my dad. Most of his violence was actually directed toward us as children, although we did have an incident where he broke into our house and was violent toward my mum, and I ended up having to call the police and we stayed at a women's shelter. What I find a lot in the conversations around domestic violence is there's an assumption that there is a caregiver in the home who is helping the children if they need support. And if those children are accessing support, that there's an adult caregiver who is capable of being the person to seek out that support and ensure the children are receiving what they need. That wasn't the case certainly in my family, but I've done quite a lot of research on this topic, and there are a lot of children who are actually growing up in homes where neither of their caregivers are up to the task of negotiating how do we access those systems, what support is available. And there's also a lot of fear involved with whether or not your kids are going to be taken away from you. If you admit that you're struggling with your mental health, in my case, my mother was an alcoholic. Putting her hand up saying that she was struggling with her mental health and she was an alcoholic, what was that going to mean about whether or not we got to stay with her or were put into foster care? We need to stop having the assumptions that everyone is growing up in the same type of home. We need to recognise children as direct victims of domestic violence. The fact that so many people who go on to perpetrate domestic violence or become victims of domestic violence as adults actually grew up in homes with domestic violence as children, it seems like a really lost opportunity there. We're not focusing more on providing early support, early intervention for young people and children, because if we can do the work early on and help with the support of the complexity of a family situation, but include children and children's experiences, and maybe help them to unlearn some of the patterns they've learnt from a very early age, that has the potential to have enormous positive impact on domestic violence rates.